It all started with a storm and a knock on my door. At first I thought the HOA in my neighborhood's Sunny Ridge Estates was just another petty group of busybodies obsessed with lawn heights and mailbox paint. But what began as minor harassment, my old car, a few threatening letters, quickly spiraled into something far darker. The so-called president, Martha Hargrove, wasn't content with bossing people around. She wanted absolute control, even if it meant putting my wife and kids in danger. When the storm cut power across the neighborhood, I became the only house with lights. That small flicker of electricity turned my family into her target. She demanded my home for an HOA meeting, and when I refused, things escalated beyond reason. By the end of that night, I would be forced to draw my gun and pull the trigger to protect the people I love most. Before we dive into the full story, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and your local time. Let's see just how far the HOA Stories community reaches. They sell you a neighborhood like it's a promise: manicured lawns, weekend barbecues, a homeowners association that will take care of everything so you don't have to. That was the brochure when Anna and I signed for the place, Sunny Ridge Estates, a cul-de-sac of beige siding and polite waves at the mailbox. We moved in thinking the HOA was a background hum, a fee on the credit card, and an occasional notice about paint colors. I thought I knew what I was buying into. I was wrong. From the outside, Sunny Ridge looked safe. Inside, it breathed a different kind of air, polite smiles that hid opinionated mouths, church ladies with sharp eyes, retirees who remembered every meeting like it was a liturgy. Most of the board were people who'd lived here long enough to know which way the wind blew, and they liked the wind to blow their way. Somewhere in the middle of that well-groomed ecosystem was Martha Hargrove, the president of the HOA, who had the voice of a PTA queen and the appetite of a small-town prosecutor. She wore pearls that might as well have been a badge. I'm not the kind of guy who likes confrontation. I fix things. I organize. I'm the dad who builds tree houses and teaches my boys to respect their tools. My life with Anna and our two kids, Lucas and Mateo, had been easy enough before Sunny Ridge, until rules and community standards began to creep into everyday life. The first warnings were small and ridiculous: an unsigned letter about our mailbox, a neighbor's text asking why our grass was an inch too long. I laughed them off, assuming stupidly that these were the petty thorns you get with any HOA. Then a towing company showed up at dawn. My car wasn't pretty. It wasn't new. It had scrapes that told a dozen stories, and I kept it because it ran, and because I'd spent enough on movers and renovations to know that a car can wait. Someone from the board had complained. Someone in power had made a phone call. Two men in cheap uniforms unhooked my car and tried to haul it away like a rusting statue. I watched from my porch as my neighbor's face, the same woman who brought over lemon bars last summer, watched with a kind of curious approval. I called the police because you call the police when someone tries to steal your property. The officers asked questions, listened to the HOA rep who was there in a collared shirt and conversational charm, and suggested we all calm down. They ended up siding with ordinance. If something looks abandoned, city code can sometimes be the pretext for a tow. The car was returned that afternoon after a flurry of paperwork and apologies that felt thin as tissue. But the message was delivered. The board had leverage. They were not afraid to use it. So I started paying attention. I tried to file complaints to ask for transparency. I emailed minutes from meetings, requested to see the bylaws, tried to start a petition. The petitions went nowhere. Half the neighborhood was older. Many trusted Martha's smile, the way she'd hand out flyers at the bake sale and call the roll at community meetings. New people like us, people who didn't know the old loyalties and small favors that bound the HOA together, were easy to dismiss. My name became almost immediately a small nuisance. I was the guy who complained. I was the troublemaker. There's a kind of quiet cruelty in organizations that do a little bit of power poorly. They aren't dramatic tyrants. They're bureaucrats who enjoy the drip of control. They test the boundaries with letters and phone calls and small punishments, watching to see who blinks. It's a slow erosion. You don't notice it until the dam breaks. The dam broke on a Tuesday evening in July, when the sky went dark and the wind sounded like an animal rubbing its paws across the roofs. The storm that rolled through Sunny Ridge wasn't some headline superstorm, but it was the kind of weather that tears shingles and knocks out transformers. For most of the neighborhood, the lights went out and stayed out. For us, the lights stayed on because we'd planned for this. I had a generator I'd bought after a previous deployment overseas, a sensible purchase, a small insurance policy for power outages. For one night, it made our little house a beacon. People come to a beacon for different reasons. For some, it's convenience. For others, it's desperation. 3 days after the storm, Evelyn and Roberto knocked on our door. They were older, stooped by years, but with the soft dignity that comes from being kind through hardship. Their house, a few doors down, had a tree through the living room. Their roof had a jagged hole like a missing tooth. Evelyn's hands trembled as she held an insulin vial. Roberto's voice was soft when he explained they couldn't keep the medicine cold. "My wife needs this," Roberto said. "I drove past your lights and I thought, maybe." They looked at Anna and me with the helplessness of people who'd lost a lifetime of small securities in one gust of wind. We invited them in. It felt right. We gave them a spare bedroom and access to the fridge, and made coffee that tasted like ritual. Evelyn cooked, despite the limitations, and filled the house with the smell of garlic and something that resembled normalcy. Roberto told stories to the boys about his time in the service, about concrete and courage, and Lucas listened like the paragraphs of his life were being filled in for the first time. Word travels in neighborhoods like wind moves through leaves. Within hours, someone knew that my house had lights and guests, and by the next day the HOA knew. I expected at worst an awkward question about how long my guests would stay. I did not expect Martha Hargrove to appear at my front door, a printed agenda in hand, and a look that said she'd been slighted by something important. She didn't come with a polite request, she came with a demand. "We need a place for a meeting," she said, like a queen announcing an edict. "The board has to convene. Your house has power." When I told her no, that we were a private home with people recovering from a storm, and that we were not a meeting hall, she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and suggested otherwise. She proposed casually, and with possessive certainty, that we move our family out for the night and let them use our home. It was the kind of demand that carried a list of implied consequences. When power is currency, people who are used to running the town suddenly imagine they can redistribute it. When the people who are supposed to steward a community begin to think they have dominion over private lives, the line between governance and tyranny blurs. I closed the door. I did not know then how far Martha would push. I did not know the price she would be willing to pay to remind everyone who was really in charge. But as I tucked Evelyn and Roberto in and watched Lucas crack a joke that made my wife laugh, a small, bright thing amid disaster, I felt the heat on my neck, the sense that we had become a target simply for being useful to our neighbors. We were about to learn just how ugly community can look when wielded like a club. If I thought the confrontation over my car was bad, what came next made it look like a minor skirmish. That night, after the storm, I lay in bed listening to the low hum of the generator and the softer hum of Evelyn's breathing down the hall. For the first time since moving into Sunny Ridge, I felt like I was doing something right, sheltering two elderly neighbors, keeping my family safe, providing light when the world outside was black. But in HOA land, doing something right is the same thing as drawing a target on your back. It began with a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, no signature, just a typed notice on official HOA stationery. It said that my car, still parked in the driveway, was out of compliance with neighborhood aesthetic standards. They wanted it removed immediately, despite the fact that I'd already proven its legality months before. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was about leverage intimidation, a reminder that they hadn't forgotten. I crumpled the letter, tossed it into the trash, and muttered to Anna, "They don't stop, do they?" She sighed, half angry and half tired, and said, "They want to wear us down." She wasn't wrong. That's what bullies do, not just in middle school hallways, but in cul-de-sacs, with white fences and rose bushes. The very next morning, a tow truck showed up again. I was ready this time. I stepped outside in jeans and a hoodie, coffee mug in one hand, and filmed everything on my phone. The driver, clearly uncomfortable, said, "Sir, we're here on orders from the HOA. They claim this vehicle has been abandoned." I laughed bitterly. "Do I look abandoned to you?" I demanded paperwork. He didn't have any. He called someone, probably Martha, and after 10 minutes of tense back and forth, the truck rumbled away empty. Neighbors peeked through blinds like vultures circling roadkill. I raised my mug in mock salute. But if the towing stunt was meant to frighten me, it only fueled me. I filed a police report, again useless, because without proof of malicious intent, it was a misunderstanding. I wrote letters to the county clerk and even emailed a local reporter. No traction. Bureaucracy moves like molasses when the threat is subtle. So I tried another route, a petition. I printed copies, walked door to door, and explained to anyone who'd listen that Martha and her cronies were stepping outside their authority. At first I thought I was making progress. A few nodded sympathetically, a few even signed. But then word spread that Martha was calling me the agitator. She claimed I was trying to dismantle the community. Older residents clutched her every word, trusting her smile and her church lady pearls. My petition fizzled out in less than a week. I remember one evening standing on the porch with the clipboard in my hand, watching people cross the street rather than meet my eyes. Anna came out and put her hand on my shoulder. "They're scared of her," she whispered. "Not of you, but that fear is enough." I should have known then that I couldn't beat Martha with signatures and niceties. She thrived on fear and manipulation. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. What I didn't realize was that others were starting to notice too. The HOA wasn't just harassing me. They were nickeling and diming families for paint shades, threatening fines over holiday decorations, even claiming one neighbor's front porch furniture was unauthorized. Little things, small abuses, but they piled up like pebbles in a jar. The older residents caved, but the younger families began to grumble. I wasn't the only one with a target anymore, just the loudest. Then came another blow, a certified letter, this time threatening legal action if I didn't comply with unspecified community standards. I took it to a lawyer in town, a sharp-tongued woman named Clara, who'd seen her fair share of HOA disputes. She flipped through the letter and chuckled. "Half of this is smoke, the other half is mirrors. They're bluffing, but they know most people don't call a bluff." Her advice: keep documentation, don't let them bait you, and if they trespass again, call me. She leaned back in her chair. "But understand this, you're fighting a machine. HOAs thrive because most folks don't want the hassle. They'd rather pay a fine or keep quiet." That cut deep. Because she was right. Most people just wanted peace, even if it meant letting tyranny grow roots. I walked out of her office, determined, but there was a knot in my gut. A week later, the HOA pulled another stunt. They sent a notice demanding I beautify my front yard, new flowers, mulch, even a suggestion for the type of shrubs they wanted. "Mandatory compliance," the letter read. I almost laughed. We were still recovering from the storm. Half the block had branches piled high and roof tarps flapping in the wind, but of course Martha didn't care. It wasn't about beauty, it was about control. I ignored it. And that's when the late-night knocks started. It was always the same rhythm, 3 sharp knocks, silence, then 1 heavy pound. I'd open the door, no one there. Sometimes I'd catch a shadow moving, sometimes just empty streetlight glow. Anna begged me to call the police, but what would I say? The HOA president is knocking and running. Still, the message was clear, we're watching. My breaking point came one Saturday morning. I took Lucas and Mateo to the park only to return and find my garage door painted with the word "Violator" in bright red spray paint. The kids gasped. Anna nearly cried. I cleaned it off myself, hands raw from scrubbing rage simmering in my veins. That evening, Evelyn and Roberto sat with me on the porch. Roberto placed a weathered hand on my shoulder and said, "Son, you're dealing with people who mistake fear for power. Don't let them win. But don't fight their game either. Pick your ground." Wise words. But I didn't yet know what ground that would be. When the power outage stretched into its second week, Sunny Ridge grew restless. People whispered about Martha hoarding supplies, about HOA funds mysteriously allocated for emergency use that no one saw. My house, the only one lit by the generator, became both a refuge and a threat. Kids drifted by gawking. Neighbors knocked asking to charge phones or stash food in my fridge. I let a few in. Others I had to turn away. Supplies were limited, and my family came first. But every kindness I showed became fuel for the HOA's gossip mill. Martha accused me of favoritism, of hoarding power. She told residents I was charging people under the table, profiting off the storm. Lies, every one of them. But lies have a way of sinking deeper than truth. By the time she marched up my driveway, demanding to use my house for a board meeting, the storm outside had nothing on the one brewing in Sunny Ridge. And I'll admit, when I saw the determination in her eyes, that cold conviction that she owned more than bylaws and budgets, a chill slid down my spine. This wasn't about lawns or cars anymore. This was about dominion. I shut the door in her face, but the sound of her hand slapping against the wood echoed long after. That night, as the generator hummed and the neighborhood sat in darkness, I realized the battle lines had been drawn, and the war with the HOA was about to begin in earnest. The morning after I slammed the door in Martha Hargrove's face, the air in Sunny Ridge Estates felt different. It wasn't the thick humidity left behind by the storm, nor the faint smell of wet pine and asphalt. It was tension, the kind that settles into a neighborhood like fog, invisible but heavy. People didn't wave anymore. Some wouldn't even look at me. When they did, their expressions carried a mix of pity and fear, as though I'd crossed a line no one else dared to step over. But here's the thing about fear: it spreads faster than truth. Martha knew this better than anyone. By noon, whispers had already started. He kicked Martha off his porch. He's harboring outsiders. He thinks he's above the HOA. Outsiders, that was her new word for Evelyn and Roberto, the 2 elderly neighbors we had taken in after the storm destroyed their home. Outsiders. as if two lifelong residents had suddenly become strangers simply because they were under my roof. That night, I decided to fight back in the only way I thought might work democracy. I dusted off the old petition I'd tried months earlier, this time determined to gather enough signatures to force change. I printed copies, walked house to house, and knocked on every door that still had hinges after the storm. My pitch was simple. The HOA is overstepping its authority. You don't have to live in fear. Let's demand accountability. At first, there was a glimmer of hope. A young couple down the street, Marcus and Denise, signed immediately saying they were sick of being fined for things as ridiculous as leaving bikes on their porch. Another neighbor, a single mother named Joy, confessed that Martha had threatened her with legal action over her non-compliant curtains. She signed too, almost eagerly. But for every supportive nod, there were two hesitant refusals. One elderly man, his hand shaking on the doorframe, whispered, "I believe you, but Martha, she's connected. Best not to stir things." Another neighbor folded her arms tightly and said, "I can't afford a fight with the HOA. Please leave." Each rejection felt like a stone in my stomach. By the end of the week, I had fewer than 20 signatures in a community of nearly 100 households. Still, I pressed on. One evening, I arranged a small gathering at my house, nothing formal, just a few neighbors who'd signed the petition. We sat around the fire pit Roberto had shown me how to build, flames flickering against the darkness. Evelyn brewed coffee over the fire while Marcus vented about a fine he'd received for planting the wrong species of tree. "They measured it, man," he said, throwing his hands up. "They actually came out with a tape measure and said it wasn't the approved oak." "Who does that?" The group laughed bitterly, but it wasn't joy. It was the laughter of people who realized they're living in a parody, trapped in a system that was supposed to protect property values but instead stripped them of dignity. That's when Joy leaned forward, her voice low. "You know what Martha told me, that if I didn't comply, she could recommend foreclosure." We all went silent. Foreclosure, the nuclear option. And while it was a bluff legally, an HOA can't just take your home without years of court battles, the word alone was enough to terrify people into submission. I told the group the truth. "She's bluffing. HOAs don't have that kind of power here, but she counts on you not knowing that. She counts on fear keeping you quiet." It felt like a rallying cry. For a moment, heads nodded, fists clenched, and people muttered about standing together. But the glow of unity faded as quickly as the firewood. A few days later, two of the neighbors who had attended called me nervously. They'd been approached by Martha herself. She told them I was dangerous, unstable, that I was arming myself and plotting to dismantle the HOA by force. Lies, of course, but lies backed by authority. Both neighbors withdrew their signatures. The petition was collapsing before it even had a chance to grow. I wasn't surprised. Martha's influence was everywhere. She had allies on the board, friends at City Hall, and a way of twisting reality so that even reasonable people began to doubt their own eyes. Still, I refused to let go. I spent evenings combing through county records, searching for evidence of mismanagement. I found hints, payments to a towing company owned by Martha's cousin, emergency repair invoices that didn't match the work done but nothing concrete enough to take to the authorities. Clara, the lawyer I'd consulted earlier, reviewed the documents and shook her head. "Suspicious. Yes, illegal. Not without proof. Be careful or she'll turn this back on you." It was a bitter pill to swallow. Every legal road I took turned into a dead end. Every attempt at diplomacy crumbled under her charm and manipulation. Then came the breaking point. It was a Thursday evening when Anna came rushing into the kitchen, her face pale. She'd been scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group, a place usually reserved for lost dogs and yard sale announcements. But tonight, Martha had posted a long message dripping with faux concern. She wrote that she was deeply troubled by my increasingly erratic behavior, that I was harboring non-residents and threatening the safety of the community. She claimed I'd refused lawful HOA inspections and brandished a weapon during a disagreement. None of it true, none of it even close. But comments poured in anyway, neighbors thanking her for looking out for the community, others demanding that something be done. Only a handful defended me, their voices drowned in a chorus of fear-fueled loyalty. Anna's eyes were wet as she held the phone out to me. "She's turning everyone against us," she whispered. I clenched my fists. For a moment, I considered replying a long, detailed rebuttal. But what good would that do? Online battles don't change hearts. They just harden lines. Instead, I stood in the doorway of our living room, watching Lucas and Mateo build a Lego fortress on the floor, oblivious to the war brewing outside. And I made a decision: if Martha wanted a fight, I'd give her one. But not on her terms. Not with petitions or Facebook posts. I would stand my ground. Roberto seemed to sense my resolve. Later that night, he sat with me on the porch, puffing slowly on an old cigar. "She's overplayed her hand," he said. People can smell tyranny even if they don't admit it. Wait long enough and they'll turn on her. I nodded, though. I wasn't sure I believed him. And what if she doesn't wait? What if she comes here again? He looked me dead in the eye, his voice steady. Then you defend what's yours. Within the law always. But you defend it. The storm outside had passed, but inside Sunny Ridge Estates, a new one was gathering strength. And I had a sinking feeling it would hit harder than any wind or rain. The storm had left Sunny Ridge Estates battered but not broken. Blue tarps fluttered on rooftops, tree limbs lay stacked at curbs like fallen soldiers, and the smell of damp earth lingered everywhere. For most, the blackout was a misery. For me, it was a reprieve. The steady hum of my generator meant my family still had cold milk, hot meals, and light when the sun went down. But in neighborhoods ruled by HOAs, every small advantage becomes a weapon. That was how Evelyn and Roberto came to live under our roof. Their home, a modest ranch 3 doors down, had been gutted by the storm when a massive oak toppled into the living room. Evelyn's insulin was spoiling, and Roberto proud as he was admitted he couldn't keep her safe there. They knocked on our door with nothing more than a grocery bag of essentials, their faces weary but polite. I didn't hesitate. Anna and I cleared out the spare bedroom, set up a small cot for Roberto, and told them to stay as long as they needed. Evelyn's eyes welled with gratitude, and she immediately busied herself in the kitchen, turning our limited pantry into meals that smelled like comfort. Roberto sat with my boys in the evenings, spinning stories about his years working construction, teaching them how to lash sticks into tripods for the fire pit we built in the backyard. It should have been a moment of community, a silver lining in a disaster. But in Sunny Ridge, generosity wasn't just kindness, it was ammunition. Word spread fast, and by the 3rd day Martha Hargrove knew. Her knock came at sunset. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch in her pink cardigan clipboard and hand lips pursed, like she was about to scold a child. Behind her 2 board members lingered, silent but watchful. I've been informed, she began, that you've taken in guests. I crossed my arms. Evelyn and Roberto. Their house is unlivable. I wasn't about to leave them in a storm-ravaged shell. Her smile was thin plastic. That's very charitable of you. But charity, you see, creates obligations. This is a community, Mr. Johnson. Resources must be shared equitably. I frowned. They're not using resources. They're sleeping in a room and keeping medicine cold in my fridge. That's it. Martha tilted her head. And yet your home is the only one with power, the only one with lights, which makes it the logical venue for the HOA's emergency meeting tonight. I stared at her, dumbfounded. You want to use my house? She nodded, matter-of-factly. Naturally. We'll need the living room cleared. Your family can stay with Roberto and Evelyn in their place for the evening. You won't be needed. I laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. You're suggesting I leave my own home so you can play Parliament in my living room? Absolutely not. Her eyes sharpened. This isn't a request. The bylaws grant the HOA authority to conduct business in the best interest of the community. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. The bylaws don't give you squat in my house. This is private property. You're not coming in, Martha. Not now, not ever. Her hand shot out, catching the door before I could close it. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I saw something raw flicker behind her controlled facade. Frustration, maybe even desperation. Think carefully, she hissed. Refusal to cooperate will have consequences. I forced the door shut, her words muffled on the other side. My pulse hammered in my ears. Inside, Roberto looked up from the couch. What was all that racket? I told him. His weathered face hardened. She's trying to make an example of you. Don't bend. But as night fell and the generator buzzed, I couldn't shake the image of Martha's smug certainty. She believed she owned this neighborhood, and worse, half the residents believed it too. I decided to prepare. The generator had only been powering essentials, but that evening I flipped on the security cameras. I wanted every angle, covered the porch, the driveway, the backyard. Something in my gut told me the fight wasn't over. Sure enough, it wasn't. The next day, Martha escalated. Notices appeared taped to mailboxes, declaring a mandatory HOA meeting and warning of disciplinary action for non-attendance. She had no legal authority to issue fines during a state of emergency, but that didn't matter. People were scared, confused, and desperate for guidance. I watched as neighbors trudged to her house, like weary soldiers, clutching their folding chairs, murmuring nervously about rules and rations. From my porch, Evelyn shook her head. Like sheep, she muttered. They'll follow anyone who promises order, even if it's tyranny. Anna squeezed my hand. And what about us? I swallowed hard. We stand our ground, no matter what. That night, we lit the fire pit again. Lucas and Mateo roasted marshmallows laughing with Roberto, while Evelyn told Anna about her childhood in Puerto Rico. For a moment, it felt almost normal, until the shadows appeared. I caught them first on the security feed, a group of figures creeping down the street, flashlights bobbing. At the front, unmistakable in her pink cardigan, was Martha. But this time she wasn't holding a clipboard. She was holding a baseball bat. I froze, bile rising in my throat. My first instinct was disbelief. This was Sunny Ridge, not some back alley. HOA presidents don't carry bats. Board members don't sneak around in the dark. And yet, here they were. I motioned everyone inside, whispering sharply to Anna to lock the kids in the bedroom. Roberto stayed beside me, his jaw tight. "She's lost her damn mind," he muttered. Through the backyard fence, Martha's voice carried shrill and commanding. "Open up, Mr. Johnson. The community has decided. Your house will host the meeting with or without your consent." I stepped forward, flashlight in hand. "You're trespassing. Leave now." Her eyes glittered in the beam. "You think you're clever, harboring outsiders, defying the board, but you forget your family lives here. How safe do you think they'll be if you keep pushing us?" She raised the bat meaningfully. Something snapped inside me then. Fear gave way to fury. My hand went to my hip where my holster sat, snug against my jeans. I didn't draw, not yet, but the weight of the gun was a cold reminder of what was at stake. "You threaten my family again," I growled, "and you'll regret it." The standoff hung in the humid air, broken only by the crackle of the fire pit. Behind me I heard Roberto's low, steady voice. "She's bluffing, son. Stand firm." But when Martha lifted the bat higher and took a step toward the house, I knew bluff had become intent. The line had been crossed, and Sunny Ridge would never be the same again. The first time Martha tried to commandeer my house for an HOA emergency meeting, I thought it was a bluff. I assumed she was posturing, trying to scare me into obedience the way she'd scared everyone else in Sunny Ridge Estates. But when she showed up at night with half the board behind her, flashlights in their fists and a baseball bat in hers, I realized it wasn't theater. She meant to push her authority straight through my front door. That evening, after the confrontation, Anna and I sat at the kitchen table long after the boys had gone to bed. The only light came from the small LED lantern humming between us. Evelyn and Roberto joined us, their faces drawn with worry. "They'll be back," Roberto said firmly, the way a man speaks when he's seen this kind of escalation before. I raised an eyebrow. "Back with what, more bats?" His eyes narrowed. "You think that was intimidation? That was a test. Next time, they'll bring numbers. They'll want to prove the HOA owns this neighborhood, and they'll use your house to make the point." Anna wrapped her arms around herself. "What if they try to take the kids?" Her voice cracked, and I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "They won't," I said, trying to sound sure, even though my stomach nodded, "because they'd have to go through me first." The next day, the harassment doubled. I woke to find notices plastered on my garage: "Non-compliant resident. Mandatory eviction for meeting space." They'd gone full Orwellian, inventing punishments out of thin air. But the sight of those papers stapled into my property sent a chill deeper than I expected. It wasn't just words anymore, it was war paint. I tore them down and went door to door again, hoping someone else in the neighborhood might finally speak up. Most refused to open their doors. Some cracked them open just enough to whisper, "We support you, but we can't risk it." The fear was palpable. Martha had her claws in these people so deep that even when they disagreed with her, they wouldn't risk her wrath. That evening, while my boys played cards with Roberto, I heard the hum of voices outside. I peered through the blinds. Martha stood on the street corner, clipboard in hand, surrounded by at least 15 residents. She was giving a speech, gesturing toward my house like it was a fortress of sin. Though I couldn't hear every word, I caught enough: selfish, uncooperative, dangerous. She ended with, "If we allow one man to ignore the rules, what's to stop chaos from swallowing Sunny Ridge?" Applause followed. Applause. I slammed the blinds shut. Evelyn, who had been listening from the hallway, muttered, "I've seen cult leaders with less control." That night, just past midnight, came another knock. Not the taunting 3 raps and a pound this time. This was steady, purposeful. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and opened the door cautiously. A neighbor stood there, Marcus, the young dad who'd signed my petition. His face was pale, his eyes darting around. "She's planning something," he whispered. "Tomorrow," she said, "if you don't surrender the house, the board will come in and remove you themselves." "Remove me," I scoffed. "That's illegal." He shook his head. "That doesn't matter to her. She told people you were hiding weapons, that you were hoarding fuel, that your kids weren't safe with you. She's painting you as a madman. I'm telling you because I don't want to see anyone hurt." I thanked him and closed the door, heart pounding. The following day, I saw the meeting take shape. Cars lined the street residents trickling toward Martha's driveway. She strutted around like a general preparing for battle. That's when I made my choice. If she wanted a showdown, it wouldn't be in whispers or rumors. I would confront her in daylight with the neighborhood watching. I walked up the street, Evelyn at my side, for moral support, Roberto, a silent shadow behind me. Conversations died as we approached. All eyes turned. Martha straightened a satisfied smile on her face. "Mr. Johnson," she said, sweetly loud enough for the crowd, "have you finally come to your senses?" I shook my head. "No, Martha. I've come to tell you what the law actually says." I held up a printout of the state's property code I'd gotten from Clara the lawyer. The HOA has no authority to enter private residences. None. You can regulate fences and lawns, but not my living room. If you or anyone else steps onto my property uninvited, it's trespassing. If you threaten my family, it's assault. You've been bluffing, and it's time they all knew it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few looked uncertain. Martha's smile faltered, then snapped back. "Don't listen to him," she barked. "He's twisting the law. This man is unstable. He's harboring outsiders and stockpiling weapons. He wants to destroy the HOA that protects you." I felt my blood boil. Protects them. You fined Denise for the color of her curtains. You threatened Joy with foreclosure. You tried to tow my legal car. That's not protection. That's tyranny dressed in a cardigan. The crowd gasped. Someone chuckled nervously. Martha's face turned crimson. "You think you can insult me? You think you can stand against this community?" I stepped closer, my voice steady. "I don't stand against the community. I stand for it. Against you." That was the breaking point. Her mask slipped. She lunged forward, jabbing her clipboard toward my chest. Roberto moved quicker than I'd ever seen, stepping between us. His voice cut like steel. "Back off, Martha. You just crossed into assault." For the first time, I saw her hesitate. Roberto's stance, his tone, it wasn't just neighborly defense. It was muscle memory. Later, I'd learned he'd spent 30 years as a police officer. At that moment, it was enough to make Martha step back. But only for a moment. She hissed, "If you won't hand over your house, then you'll learn the hard way." And with that, she stormed off her flock, trailing behind. That night, I reinforced every lock, turned on every camera, and sat on the porch with my gun holstered at my hip. Because I knew deep down this wasn't over. The HOA had declared war, and next time they wouldn't come with clipboards, they'd come to break us. The line between neighborly dispute and open warfare had officially been crossed. By the time the sun went down that evening, I knew in my gut that Martha wouldn't let things end with harsh words on the street. She had been embarrassed in front of her flock, and people like her, people who thrive on power, don't forgive humiliation. They double down. The generator hummed in the background as my boys huddled in the living room with Roberto building towers of cards by flashlight. Evelyn busied herself in the kitchen, clattering pots and pans like the noise alone could keep her nerves steady. Anna sat beside me on the porch, arms folded, staring into the darkness. "You know she's going to come back," Anna said softly. I nodded. "The question is, when?" It didn't take long to find out. Just past midnight, the cameras picked them up. A group of silhouettes moving in formation down the street, flashlights cutting through the dark. This wasn't the hesitant shuffle of neighbors gossiping. This was a purposeful march. At the front was Martha, of course, her cardigan glowing faint pink in the beam, and in her hands again, that baseball bat. Behind her, two of the board members carried crowbars. I swore under my breath. "They're here," I whispered. Roberto moved to the window, eyes narrowing. "They're armed, and they're headed straight for your back gate." Anna gasped. "We need to call the police." Already dialing, I shoved the phone into her hands. "Do it. But we can't count on them arriving in time." I stepped into the backyard, flashlight in one hand, the weight of my holstered gun in the other. The fire pit still glowed faintly from earlier embers sparking against the night. Martha's voice cut through the quiet. "Open the gate, Mr. Johnson. We've had enough of your defiance. Your home belongs to this community, not to you." I aimed the flashlight at her face. "You're trespassing. You need to leave. Right now." She sneered. "Not until you learn your place." And then she did it. She raised the bat, not at me, but toward the sliding glass door where Anna stood, my boys just behind her. Something inside me snapped. I drew the gun, my voice booming across the yard. "Drop it now." For a split second, the world froze. The crowd gasped. Martha hesitated, and then with a look of twisted triumph, she lunged forward. I didn't think. I acted. The gun fired once, the crack echoing across Sunny Ridge like thunder. The bullet tore into her leg, and she collapsed with a scream, the bat clattering to the grass. Chaos erupted. Her followers scattered flashlights, bobbing wildly as they fled into the night. Only two remained frozen in shock until Roberto barked, "Get the hell out," and they bolted after the others. My heart pounded. My ears rang. I stood there, gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Anna rushed out, grabbing the boys and pulling them back inside. Evelyn appeared behind her, face pale. Roberto stayed steady, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Safety on," he murmured. I clicked it, lowered the weapon, and set it down on the patio table, hands shaking but visible. Minutes later, the red and blue lights appeared. The neighbors had heard the shot, of course. You could hear it across the whole block. When the officers arrived, I was already sitting on the ground, hands open, the gun well out of reach. I didn't resist as they cuffed me. Protocol, I knew. But still, the sight of my sons crying from the window as their father was led to a squad car was a knife in my chest. The interrogation began at the curb. Martha was moaning dramatically on the grass, clutching her leg, blood staining the once pristine cardigan. Between sobs, she screamed, "He tried to kill me. He's insane. Arrest him." I stayed calm. I defended my family. She came armed on my property and threatened my wife and kids. It's all on the cameras. The younger officer looked uncertain. The older one raised a brow. "Cameras, back of the house. Every angle," I said. That's when Roberto stepped up. I saw everything. She advanced on his family with a bat. He gave clear warnings. He fired only when she posed imminent danger. The officers exchanged a glance. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. The older officer looked at Roberto and said, "Detective Alvarez." Roberto nodded grimly. "Retired. But I still know how to read a crime scene." Recognition flickered in the cop's eyes, followed quickly by respect. They pulled up the footage, Evelyn guiding them through the camera feeds on my phone. The evidence was crystal clear: Martha trespassing, armed, threatening, and me holding my ground until the last possible second. Within the hour, the cuffs were off my wrists. The officers escorted Martha, still shrieking about conspiracies, into an ambulance. She wasn't dead, but she was finished. The board members, who had fled earlier, they returned quietly the next day, summoned by subpoenas. Trespassing, conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon, charges that would take months to fully unravel. But that night, after the last squad car pulled away and the neighborhood fell silent again, I sat at the fire pit with Roberto. "You did what you had to do," he said simply. I stared at the embers. I didn't want to. No one ever does. He leaned forward, voice low. "But men like Martha don't stop until someone makes them." Inside, Anna tucked the boys into bed, whispering reassurances I wasn't sure either of us believed. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling around a cup of tea. And me, I stared into the darkened street, the faint echo of the gunshot still ringing in my ears. Sunny Ridge Estates would never be the same, but neither would I. The morning after the gunshot, Sunny Ridge Estates looked like a war zone without the rubble. Sirens had faded, police tape still fluttered around my yard, and the neighborhood was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone had heard the crack of the bullet echo through the blackout silence. Some neighbors crossed the street to avoid walking past my house. Others lingered, pretending to check mailboxes that had been empty for days just to gawk. And in the middle of it all, rumors grew faster than weeds. He tried to murder her. No, she came at him with a bat. I heard his wife called the cops before he even fired. Did you know he's harboring strangers in there? By the time the sun fully rose, Sunny Ridge wasn't divided between believers and doubters. It was divided between the terrified and the opportunists. Inside my house, the air was heavy. Anna moved quietly, almost mechanically, making breakfast for the kids, though no one had much of an appetite. Evelyn sat at the table with folded hands, lips moving in silent prayer. Roberto, ever the sentinel, kept watch from the porch eyes, scanning the street like he was still on duty. I sat in the living room staring at the gun on the counter, now clean safety on a symbol of everything I never wanted to be. I bought that weapon for protection, yes, but deep down I had hoped I'd never have to pull the trigger. And yet last night when Martha raised that bat toward my wife and kids, I didn't hesitate. The police had cleared me. The footage was airtight. Roberto's testimony carried weight, especially when the officers realized he wasn't just some old man, but a retired detective with decades of credibility. They saw what happened for what it was: defense, self-preservation, a father protecting his family. But legality doesn't erase fear. It doesn't erase the way Lucas clutched my arm that night, whispering, "Dad, are you going to jail?" It doesn't erase the way Anna's hands shook when she folded the laundry this morning. It doesn't erase the fact that I had become the man with the gun. Martha, meanwhile, was recovering in the hospital. Her leg was shattered, her pride worse. And yet, even strapped to an IV, she was still scheming. I learned from Marcus, the young dad, who'd warned me that she was already spinning her version of events. According to her, she had been leading a safety inspection when I snapped. She told anyone who would listen that I had lured her onto my property and shot her unprovoked. The difference this time was evidence. Video proof, multiple eyewitnesses, and the undeniable fact that she'd shown up armed. Still, she wasn't without allies. The more gullible residents bought her story wholesale. A small but loud faction in Sunny Ridge began demanding I be removed from the neighborhood for the safety of the community. That phrase, safety of the community, made my stomach turn. It was exactly the kind of language tyrants love. Roberto saw it too. "She's playing her last cards," he said one evening as we sat by the fire pit. "If she can't win through force, she'll win through fear." He was right. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes, crude printouts accusing me of violence, of endangering children, of being a gun nut. They bore no signature, but everyone knew whose hand was behind them. I considered suing for defamation. Clara, the lawyer, told me it was possible, but would take months, maybe years, and cost a fortune. The better move, she said, is to go after the HOA itself. If you dissolve the board, you dissolve her power. That idea lodged itself in my brain like a seed. So with Roberto's help, I tried again. This time, though, I wasn't some isolated crank. I had credibility. I had allies. And most importantly, I had proof. We went door to door together. When people hesitated, Roberto introduced himself. Detective Alvarez, retired. I witnessed everything. That changed the tone immediately. Suddenly, the hesitant whispers gave way to questions, to anger. Denise admitted she'd been fined for having a garden gnome. Joy revealed Martha had once threatened to report her to Child Protective Services over a lawn toy. Others confessed their own run-ins, petty fines, intimidation, lies. By the end of the week, the petition had over 60 signatures, enough to call an emergency vote to dissolve the HOA entirely. But Martha wasn't done. From her hospital bed, she filed an injunction trying to block the vote, claiming it was illegally organized. When that failed, she demanded the meeting be held at her home, a request the majority ignored. For once, the tide had turned. The vote was held in Marcus and Denise's garage. Folding chairs crammed between bicycles and storage boxes, neighbors sweating in the humid air. When my turn came to speak, I didn't grandstand, I didn't roar. I just told the truth. I told them how Martha tried to tow my car illegally, how she threatened my family, how she stormed my backyard with a bat. I showed them the footage. The room was silent except for the occasional gasp. Then Roberto stood. He explained who he was, what he'd seen, and why Martha's behavior was not only unethical but criminal. His calm authority sealed it. When the ballots were counted, the result was overwhelming. The HOA was dissolved. Effective immediately. The cheer that went up wasn't loud, more like a long sigh of relief from a neighborhood that had been holding its breath for too long. People hugged. Some cried. Me, I just sat there numb. Because even in victory, I couldn't shake the memory of that gunshot. I couldn't shake the image of Martha crumpling to the grass, the sound of my boys screaming from the window. Back home, Anna hugged me tight. "It's over," she whispered, but I wasn't so sure. Because tyrants don't disappear quietly. They wait, they fester, they plot. And somewhere in a hospital bed across town, Martha Hargrove was already dreaming of her return. For weeks after the vote to dissolve the HOA, Sunny Ridge Estates felt like a neighborhood waking up from a fever dream. The signs came down, the fines stopped, and for the first time since moving there, I could stand on my porch without scanning the street for Martha's patrol of board members. Kids rode their bikes freely, lawn furniture appeared without fear of violations, and laughter, real unguarded laughter, returned to the cul-de-sac. But peace has a strange weight when it follows chaos. It feels fragile, like porcelain balanced on the edge of a shelf. The day after the dissolution, I found Evelyn in the kitchen baking cookies with Anna. Flour dusted her cardigan, and she hummed softly, as though the storm, both literal and political, had never happened. Roberto sat with Lucas and Mateo on the porch, teaching them how to whittle sticks into little boats. They looked like a family we'd always had, but never knew we needed. Yet even in that warmth, I couldn't shake the gnawing thought. What if Martha came back? Her charges were pending: trespassing, assault, conspiracy, but the law moves slow. She had friends, connections. All it would take was one sympathetic judge, one technicality, and she'd be back on the street with her pearls and her clipboard ready to start again. I thought about leaving Sunny Ridge altogether. Selling the house, starting over somewhere without HOAs somewhere, my boys could grow up without the constant threat of rules. But the idea of running gnawed at me worse than staying. This was my home, my family's sanctuary. Why should we be the ones to flee? The neighborhood seemed to agree. Without the HOA, residents began to form new bonds. Marcus and Denise hosted block parties. Joy started a neighborhood watch group, this time built on volunteers instead of threats. Slowly, the fear Martha had cultivated drained away, replaced by cautious trust. One evening, about 2 months after the vote, Roberto joined me by the fire pit. The boys had just gone to bed, and the cicadas sang their endless chorus in the trees. "You did good," he said simply. I shook my head. "It doesn't feel good. I keep thinking about that night, about pulling the trigger." He studied me for a long moment. "I carried a badge for 30 years. Saw men who hesitated and paid the price. Saw men who acted too quickly and paid another kind of price. The truth is, there's never a clean way. You did what you had to do. The law backed you up. Your family's safe. That's what matters." I stared into the fire. "Then why do I feel like I lost something?" "Because you did," he said quietly. "Innocence. Once you cross that line, you can't go back. But you can choose what you do with it. You can let it eat you, or you can let it remind you what's worth fighting for." His words stuck with me. The weeks turned to months, and Sunny Ridge settled into its new rhythm. Evelyn and Roberto repaired their home, though they still spent Sundays at our house sharing meals and stories. The boys began calling them Grandma and Grandpa, titles they accepted with tears in their eyes. It felt for the first time like we were part of something bigger than ourselves, not an HOA's version of community, but a real one. One built on kindness, not control. But every so often I'd catch a whisper of the past. A headline about Martha's court date. A rumor that one of her old allies was trying to revive the HOA under a different name. Each time my stomach tightened and I found myself checking the locks twice at night. I learned something in those months. Fear doesn't vanish. It lingers like smoke after a fire. But it doesn't have to control you. The night the court finally handed down its ruling, I sat at the kitchen table refreshing the news feed on my phone. When the words appeared, "former HOA president sentenced to probation and barred from serving on any homeowners association board," I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It wasn't the harshest sentence. Honestly, it was lighter than she deserved. But it was enough. Enough to keep her from ever wielding that kind of power again. Anna hugged me, tears wetting my shirt. "It's really over," she whispered. For the first time, I believed her. Now when I walk through Sunny Ridge, I see it differently. Not as a battlefield, but as a neighborhood that survived tyranny and came out stronger. And when I see my boys racing their bikes down the street, laughing with friends whose parents once feared speaking out, I know it was worth it. Because this story was never just about Martha, it was about us. About learning that communities don't need rulers, they need neighbors. And though I'll carry the memory of that gunshot forever, I also carry something else, the reminder that even in the darkest nights, light can come from standing your ground. Life teaches harsh lessons in strange ways. What I learned from Sunny Ridge is this: freedom isn't free, and safety isn't guaranteed by rules written in some handbook. It's protected by the courage to say no when everyone else whispers yes. My story isn't about violence. It's about boundaries. It's about refusing to let fear dictate your life. And maybe, just maybe, it's about realizing that sometimes the best family you'll ever have isn't the one you're born into, but the one you build along the way. So to you watching this, wherever you are, cherish your freedom, protect your family, and never ever let anyone trick you into believing they have more power over your life than they really do. What about you? Have you ever faced a Martha in your neighborhood, someone who thought rules made them a king or queen? Drop your stories in the comments below. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to join our growing community of HOA survivors and truth tellers. Because trust me, the best way to beat tyranny is to share the story of how you stood your ground.